What is going on, guys? Welcome back. In this video today I'm going to talk a little bit about why I switched to using Linux full-time and how it is going. So let us get right into it. Alright, so roughly 5 months ago I decided to switch to Linux as my full-time operating system away from Windows, and in particular I switched to Pop! OS, which is a distribution based on Ubuntu, which is a distribution based on Debian, so you could say Pop! OS is also based on Debian. And I posted this here on my channel 5 months ago, roughly 5 months ago. Switch to Linux full time, let's see how it goes. Not missing Windows yet, with this beautiful screenshot of a couple of terminal windows perfectly aligned in tiling mode with CMatrix, NeoFetch, BTOP, just nice to look at. And from this day on, I've been basically using Pop! OS as my main operating system on my desktop PC, on my laptop every single day. And in this video today, I just want to talk a little bit about this. I want to talk about the experience of switching to Linux full-time from Windows, of using Linux as your full-time operating system. I want to talk about my setup. I want to talk about the reasons I switched in the first place, about what I maybe miss at this point from Windows, what I missed in the beginning, but what I don't really care about anymore, because this is a different thing. Some things you just cannot replace on Linux, and some things are just inconvenient in the beginning, but you forget about them because actually it's just getting used to it. And I want to talk a little bit about this whole process and everything around it. So this can maybe be a decision-making help for you if you want to switch to Linux, deciding whether you want to actually do it or not. So first of all, my setup is a very simple one. I have two hard drives in my PC. I have a Linux hard drive and a Windows hard drive. Now, I still switch to Linux full-time. 99% of the time I boot into Linux. I just have the Windows hard drive because I cannot afford to not be able to run something. Because we all know that the main problem with Linux is compatibility, and this is something that the Linux community cannot really do something about, because it's other companies not providing software for Linux. It's not Linux being, incapable to run it. It's just a result of other companies not making it compatible with Linux. But I need to have Windows as a backup if I need to run something. I cannot just say, oh, I cannot run it because I have Linux. I need to have the capability to run everything, and Windows is the most compatible system. Having said that, I only use Windows for occasional gaming, which doesn't happen too often, and in the rare case where I have to run a software, where I have to open a file that I cannot open with the alternative software on Linux properly. This includes sometimes working with advanced Excel files. This includes sometimes filling advanced PDF files, but 99% of the time I use only Linux. So it's still a switch to Linux full time with the option of using Windows occasionally. Also, since I'm using the same PC here, I have the ability to access my Windows hard drive here through this file explorer. So I can browse my Windows system from Linux here, which is very convenient. So this is my setup. So it's a dual boot setup where I 99% of the time boot into Linux. So let's talk a little bit about the reasons I switched to Linux. So why did I decide that I don't want to use Windows as my full-time operating system anymore? Why did I decide that Linux is the way to go and I want to use Linux full-time as my main operating system, or a Linux-based system? And there are multiple reasons for that. One of the main reasons for me is just that it is optimized and very convenient for developers. And this happens in multiple different ways. And one of the main ways in which this is the case is the terminal. I can just open up a terminal here and basically I can do everything with it. This is extremely powerful in Linux. It's native. I don't need some emulation. I don't need the WSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux, to run Linux. I have Linux. The system is Linux, and I can access every part of it through the terminal, and the terminal is an extremely powerful tool. I can do so many things in the terminal, and I know that this is something that not developers or non-developers don't really care about, or maybe don't even like, because they have to use the terminal even though they don't want to. But for me as a programmer, for me as someone who really likes using command lines, this is a very big selling point of Linux-based systems, that the terminal is so powerful and that I can do so many things in the terminal, and that everything is so convenient with the terminal. This includes stuff like using NeoVim. I can use NeoVim on Windows. I can use it with CMD. I can use it in PowerShell. I can use it in the WSL. But the experience of using terminal tools is not even comparable to Linux, because in Windows, you don't really use the terminal too often. So if I want to use NeoVim, I basically have to force myself to use the Windows command line or the emulated subsystem for Linux, in order to use NeoVim, for example, on Windows. Whereas in Linux, I'm using the terminal anyways, and I can just go to my desktop and open up a new file.txt with NeoVim, and I have NeoVim here natively running in my terminal. I know that this is not too important for a lot of people, but for me, this is a game changer. I like using NeoVim in a terminal, especially for editing simple files, not for long programming sessions, but for editing simple files. I just love to use NeoVim and other terminal tools as well. I like that I have dtop running instead of a task manager, that I can use terminal tools like this. This is just something that works on Linux much better. And in addition to that, of course, developer tools. Every developer tool is super, super easy to install on Linux, or almost every developer tool. This is almost, this compatibility issue that you have with Windows, where you want to get something running on Linux that works easily on Windows. It's almost the other way around for developer tools. I have the experience, or I have the feeling that when I want to install something that's a developer tool, that's a command line based developer tool, it's 10 times easier to install it on Linux, and it's harder to do it on Windows, because on Windows you don't have package managers by default. You have to install something like Choco, or you have to find some workaround. You have to emulate something. On Linux, you just use your package manager, sudo apt install, and then whatever tool you want to have. And maybe you have to add some repository or something, but it's super, super convenient to just install packages on Linux easily. So the package manager itself is a big point for me. Having package managers well integrated in the system, not having to constantly go to websites to download packages or to download package files or installers is a big thing for me. Also, updates, I can just say sudo apt update. Then I can say afterwards sudo apt upgrade, and then all my software is up to date. I don't have to do anything else. It's just convenient. So the first thing I would say is, for a developer, Linux-based systems are extremely convenient. It's just very easy to do developer stuff. It does not apply to a lot of other areas. It does not apply for to people that are mainly using their system for browsing or office work. But for developers, Linux is just, in my opinion, way more convenient than Windows, especially because the terminal is so powerful. So that's one thing. The second thing is, Linux systems are by nature, since they're open source, extremely customizable. You can basically do whatever you want with your system. And this can be done in a very simple way. Oftentimes there are options for that. But if you want to go the hardcore route, if you see something is not possible, you can just reprogram the system. You can just develop your own code and put it into the system. So there's literally no limit with Linux, because you can just code your own Linux. You can just code your own components in Linux, your own applications, and you can access every single piece of the operating system because it's open source. You can see the source code and you can change the source code. But even without going as deep, you can just do a lot of customization that's not possible on Windows. So a very simple thing on Linux, it's not on Windows. Sorry, it's not possible easily to have the possibility to just use super and enter to open up a command line. I tried to do this. It is not possible. What I could do on Windows is I had the taskbar, and I could do Windows key and 1 to open the first icon, Windows key and 2 to open the second icon, but I could not just customize my keyboard shortcuts. I could not say, okay, super key and F opens the file explorer, super key and S opens Fsearch, super key and T or super key and enter opens the terminal, super key and B opens the browser, and stuff like that. This is something that I can do easily on Linux. Same goes for theme customizations, for all sorts of settings, for system drivers. I can customize every single thing of my system. I own the system. It's my system. I'm never forced to do updates if I don't want to do them. I can do with my system whatever I want because I have the source code. I have full access to everything, and it's just extremely customizable. And for me, that's very important. And maybe another reason, which is more emotional, it's not really a logical reason for why Linux is better. It just fits my style of using a computer much more. I like this hacky way of using an operating system. I like it to be efficient, automated. I like to have procedures for everything. I like to have my bash RC file where I have all these shortcuts. I like to have my NeoVim config, which I can edit. I like to have all these things set up exactly the way I want them to be set up. I want to have my operating system tailored to my needs and as efficient and automated as possible. I like using the command line. I like the design of Linux systems. I like the design of Pop! OS. I like how everything is structured. I like having the workspaces here. I like having the tiling mode where I can just say Windows Y, and then I can open up terminals and it tiles them automatically. I like having this style of operating system. It's not really a logical thing. It's just emotionally, I feel more at home using a system like this than using Windows. So those are the main reasons I switched to Linux. A lot of people might also put into the reasons ethical concerns and privacy concerns. I care about privacy, but this would not be a reason for me to switch from Windows to Linux. If Windows was the better operating system in every other way, I would not care about the privacy too much. So this is not the reason I switched, but it's one extra reason if you care about this. Now, let's talk a little bit about the downside of using Linux. What am I maybe missing? I am definitely missing a proper native support for MS Office. I like using Microsoft Office. I think Microsoft Office is a wonderful suite. It's a lot of wonderful tool collection of Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and all that. And I don't think that any software that is available on Linux can replace it properly. I don't think LibreOffice is as good. I think OnlyOffice comes very close to replacing MS Office. I think when you use OnlyOffice, it looks like you're actually using Exo. But it has its limitation. It's not the same tool. It's made for compatibility. It's enough for working with files that should also work on Linux, on Windows, but it's not the perfect replacement. It doesn't have all the features. It's not the same software. So this is one thing that for me is a problem. For a lot of people, Adobe tools are also a problem. I don't use any Adobe tools, but if I was using them, I would not be able to run them on Linux. I would have to use Windows for that. Occasionally, you will encounter pieces of software that don't offer native support for Linux. I think Notion is one of them, but Notion, the good thing about Notion, as you can see down here, I have it, is that or I think actually Notion might be supported through a snap package officially, but I think that for a while it was not supported and there were still community packages because it's basically just an Electron app and you can turn it into a Linux compatible package and all that. But certain pieces of software just don't offer a desktop client for Linux. Evernote, I think, doesn't offer a native Linux client. DaVinci Resolve does offer a Linux client, but it has limitations. You cannot use certain codecs for whatever reason unless you use the premium version. So using Linux means that a lot of software is not going to be available for you perfectly out of the box, and that you have to find workarounds or alternative software or a way to use that software maybe on Windows and then go back to Linux. It's not always perfect. So compatibility is always an issue on Linux. Some tools also don't have perfect replacements. So simple things. I'm talking about very simple things like the emoji keyboard on Windows. You might think it's stupid. Why do you need an emoji keyboard? I happen to use it quite a lot. I happen to use the emoji keyboard on Windows occasionally because on Notion, I like to have my tasks in a to-do list and I like to have icons. So if I have the task, record a video, I will have an icon of a camera next to it. And when I have the task, write a book, I will have the icon of a book. Or when I have the task, do some freelancing work, I will have a laptop as an icon. And this is a small example, but the emoji keyboard on Windows is not perfectly replaceable by Smile, I think. Smile is a nice keyboard. I can use it here. But it is not the perfect replacement. It has problems that the Windows emoji keyboard does not have. And I cannot find a proper replacement for it. It's a small thing. It doesn't kill the operating system for me, but it's a small thing that I don't like. Same thing with GPaste. GPaste is a somewhat good alternative for the multiple clipboards on Windows, but I think the multiple clipboards on Windows just work better, for example. So there's certain things that I cannot really fix at this point that I just have a problem with, but they're not killing the operating system for me. Another thing, and this is interesting, is that on Linux, you can open up PDF files with Ocular, for example, or with Document Viewer. The problem is that Linux does not support scrolling, so automatic scrolling with the middle mouse button, because the middle mouse button, the center mouse button, is used for pasting. And I know that the Linux community gets very angry when you say you want that feature because they say this is not the Linux way of doing things. But this is also a thing that for me is just not nice that I cannot change this. It doesn't seem to be possible to properly use a middle mouse button auto scrolling. I can do something approximating it. I can, hold the button and then move my mouse, but I cannot get the same behavior that I'm used to from Windows. But those are just small things that I'm missing about using Windows. However, there were a lot of things that were hard in the beginning that don't really matter anymore. So a lot of things that are inconvenient in the beginning, but in my daily Linux life right now, I don't really notice them. So for example, in the beginning, there's a lot of setup and troubleshooting that you need to do. You want to connect multiple monitors. I mean, in Pop! OS, I need to mention, Pop! OS is a very easy to use and easy to set up system. It's very compatible out of the box, so I had almost no problems with it. But certain things just didn't work out of the box. Certain things like my headphones had some audio problems when I connected them to my PC here, and this was something with a Bluetooth connection, so I needed to go into these settings. I needed to edit some config files, and then I wanted to do something else, and I had to do another configuration for basic functionality of the system. And maybe for you that's a Wi-Fi connection, maybe for you that's using 3 monitors, maybe for you that's using a specific audio interface, whatever. It works in the end, so you can make it work, but it's a process. You cannot just plug and play Linux. You don't install Linux and everything works out of the box the way it does maybe for a Mac system, and oftentimes also for Windows. You have to do troubleshooting, setup, and you have to play around, experiment. You have to go into forums, you have to go on Reddit, you have to go into the different support channels, Mattermost, for example, and you need to ask questions to make things work. As of right now, I'm not doing that really anymore. I don't know when the last time was that I visited a forum to fix a bug. I am satisfied with my system, but it took some time for me to get to this point. It was not plug and play at all. And I understand that a lot of people have a hard time switching to Linux because they don't want to waste time on getting basic functionality working. So this is something that can be annoying in the beginning, but it doesn't really matter once you're past this. So I don't have the problem anymore, really. Another thing is, of course, some things are a little bit more buggy than on Windows. And it's not really a big problem, but it's something that you need to, sometimes things just glitch. Sometimes things just don't work. And oftentimes, again, this is a process of finding a workaround or finding a fix. Once you have it, it usually works. But you just figure it out over weeks and months of using Linux. And it takes some time for you to really get a system that works the way you want it to work. And of course, in general, even if everything works, you need to get used to the Linux way of doing things. Things on Linux are done in a different way. And oftentimes, it's not that you cannot replace a feature of Windows. It's just that you're not supposed to replace that feature because the Linux way of doing things is a different way of doing things. And at this point, I can say that switching back to Windows, using Windows as my main operating system and leaving Linux behind and maybe having Linux as a 1% operating system that I occasionally boot in would be harder for me right now than it was to switch to Linux. So I think that I would have more pain now switching to Windows than I had switching to Linux from Windows. So I think it's all about getting used to it, and getting used to Windows now would be harder to me than it was the other way around. So those are, I would say, the main reasons why I switched and the main things that I don't like about Linux. All in all, I'm very satisfied. I'm not looking back. I'm not thinking about switching back to Windows. However, I would also never get rid of my second hard drive. I would never wipe Windows completely. I need to have this backup of knowing that if there is a software I need to run, I have Windows. I can use Windows for gaming, I can use Windows for Excel, I can use Windows for PDFs, for every tool I need. I don't usually do it. I don't usually use Windows as a replacement for software. I'm much more likely to find an alternative and to just accept that certain features in this alternative are not existent. But I need to have this backup. So yeah. Now, the question might arise, should you switch now to Linux full-time as your operating system? Now, fundamentally, that's up to you, but I would recommend what you could do is, if you have the possibility, for example, on a desktop PC, get 2 hard drives, install Linux on 1 hard drive, and have this dual boot setup that I have, and try to use Linux as much as possible. Don't get rid of Windows, have your Windows system, use it for gaming, use it occasionally if you cannot find a way to make Linux work, use it if you don't have the time to experiment around with Linux. But other than that, try to use Linux as your main operating system for 1, 2, or 3 months. Set up everything that doesn't work, troubleshoot, try to fix the bugs that you encounter and see if you can live with Linux, and maybe you will notice that using Linux as a developer is more convenient than using Windows, and maybe you don't even want to use Windows anymore. This is the case for me. I just enjoy using Linux so much more than using Windows. And once you get over the bugs, once you get over the problems that you have initially, it's, in my opinion, really the better operating system. However, maybe you notice that that's not the case for you, then just stick with Windows. Windows is not a horrible system. Windows is a nice system as well. I just prefer using Linux. One thing that I will mention though is if you choose to switch to Linux as your as your full-time operating system, you will contribute to Linux being more compatible long-term, because most of the problems that we have with Linux are due to lack of compatibility, and the lack of compatibility comes primarily from not enough people using Linux. The market share in the desktop operating system market is very low for Linux systems, and because of that, people don't really care about Linux that much. They don't have to offer the software to Linux people because most people are using Mac or Windows anyways. Why care about Linux? More people going to Linux means more compatibility for Linux systems long term. This includes probably also gaming. So yeah, if that's something that you want to be a part of, you can consider switching to Linux. Yeah. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and hope you learned something. If so, let me know by hitting the like button and leaving a comment in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell to not miss a single future video for free. Other than that, thank you much for watching. See you in the next video, and bye.